Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. We're here in Bonn today, and right behind me, delegates from all around the world are gathering for this year's Bonn Climate Conference. This session usually gets much less attention than the annual climate COPs. However, the discussions are an important check-in between the COPs, and they play a key role in shaping the negotiations. For Just Transition, this session marks a particularly important moment as the Just Transition Work Programme, whose structure was agreed at COP28 in Dubai last year, is actually kickstarting its work. What is this all about and what is happening on the ground? Let's find out more. I'm here with Camilla Roman from the International Labour Organization. She was involved in the first dialogue of the Just Transition Work Programme and where she was moderating some of the sessions, and she can tell us a little bit more about it. What is the Just Transition Work Programme and why was it set up?
So moving towards environmentally sustainable, low-carbon resilient economies requires far-reaching transformations. It will have implications in terms of jobs, in terms of social equity, in terms of inclusion. It is a necessity to have climate action with social justice perspective embedded in it. We know that this is a key enabler for ambition. Having a dedicated work program on just transition was a historical decision because it allows for a space and for a process to discuss just transition pathways that can enhance the achievement of the Paris goal in a way that is fair and equitable and leaves no one behind.
Why was this first dialogue so significant and what was actually happening in the room?
The dialogue was significant because it created a space for countries and stakeholders to share inspiring good practices, ideas, actionable solutions on how to advance just transition in the context of climate plans. We know that the new round of NDCs is coming up, and this was the focus of the dialogue.
What was the main takeaway that you got from the dialogue?
There's a huge difference in the conception of just transition between developed countries and developing countries. For developed countries, just transition means good practices established on the national level. But for the developing countries, just transition means also the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and the need to access to climate finance, to technology, to capacity building.
The Just Transition Dialogue was very important. It was a progressive process that set us thinking and bringing various actors together to share our views and to have a common agenda in our next deliberations. However, there were some few issues that I would want us to look at. First and foremost, the process that was used was not consultative broadly. When you looked in the rooms, you realized that a lot of the parties and civil society members were not there because it was strictly by invitation. But this is the first dialogue, and just transition actually is going to happen to everybody.
I think we, from the Women and Gender constituency, really felt quite disappointed in the way that civil society broadly, including us, were engaged in the dialogue. And the dialogue began with these presentations from countries listing their action on just transition, but never consulted civil society on, maybe we actually have some expertise and critical information that we can be sharing in presentations or prioritizing our voices and guiding some of the framing questions or discussions.
It was very interesting that we meet together so we can find a way to define, first of all, what do we mean behind this expression, just transition, because it is a very divergent point, of course. And I think the main thing what I gain from this dialogue is, first of all, they are all agree that it must be people-oriented.
I was very positively surprised to see that many examples of coordination to address the topic across different stakeholders, but also specifically, as I mainly work with government stakeholders on a daily basis, to see in both the Global North and the Global South how well they coordinate already to address the topic jointly, and also how inclusive they approach the topic.
If it's not with the workers, then for us it's not just transition. And we saw this recognized during these dialogues, that many countries, organizations focused on the labor impact of climate change.
in the room, we continue to challenge the parties to step outside this narrow mindset of transition, whether it's only limited to the workforce or only limited to the energy sector, and look at it in a much more broader length, where we put the people at the center of the conversation. Even when these stakeholders were brought up in the room, it was always in the form of inclusivity or just consultation. And as constituencies, we have had a long history of restating the fact that our roles cannot be diluted to just consultation, but we should be effectively engaged across the processes of implementation of a work program. That's where the justice element comes from.
Was there any comment or perspective that you found particularly powerful in the discussions?
To me, I think the question around means of implementation came up a lot. That is finance, technology transfer, as well as capabilities and capacities. We know that the global socioeconomic system, the global financial system desperately needs reforming, and that the just transition is not free. But the type of financing that needs to be provided from developed countries to developing countries actually has a matter of justice attached to it, because it's not only about the quantity of the financing, but the type of financing.
Just transitions is not the same for everyone. To be just, the transition has to touch on the national needs, the local needs, the individual needs.
One perspective was basically that a key sector that has been underrepresented maybe in the whole discussion is the care sector. So the discussions thus far have focused quite a bit on the energy sector, but actually to take into account also, the lack of consideration and actually placing value upon the crucial work of women in the care sector is something that we should really focus much more on. So I found that perspective very powerful in the sense of also broadening the horizon in this whole discussion and moving from one specific sector to more of a whole of economy and whole of society approach.
I remember a few coming out saying negotiators representing labor ministries go to the ILO to negotiate, environmental ministries come here to negotiate, and then they'll talk to each other, and just transition really is about a whole government approach. And so we do need these different ministries talking to each other to see how they can implement together a just transition for the whole economy.
Some of the comments from my fellow civil society organizations, particularly Women and Gender, who were in the room that I was in, and the Youngo representatives, they made really impactful interventions which raised the need to address extractive industries, the need to address the care economy as part of the just transition. And I found those interventions to be really moving. And indeed, they aligned with some of the interventions from some of the countries as well, some of the parties, some of the countries who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate breakdown.
We talk a lot about workforces, especially people from the north, but for us from the south, the main objective that we have is first to provide electricity access to our people.
We had the business representative that spoke very much about skills shortages and so on, and we appreciated very much that he denied the big focus that often is being given on there is not enough workers with good skills. He said we need better policies to bring the workers with the skills to the jobs where they are needed, the transition. And that's, for me, it was a surprising position from the business community, and we appreciate that very much.
UNCTAD made a presentation on trade policies, and in our negotiations, our partners from the north are trying to tell us that we should not talk about unilateral decisions. However, if UNCTAD has come to the grounds of UNFCCC, then it means that this is an issue that we should be looking at, especially when it's even in the convention. As we talk now, our vulnerable farmers have been exposed to certain standards from European Union that their goods cannot be exported. And so when we're doing this just transition and these standards, these unilateral measures are not looked at, then a lot of people will be left behind. And farmers are the backbone of our economy in Africa and especially in Ghana.
Gladly appreciate common relevance to the social dialogue. So it will be very interesting to talk about this principle and how we include it in all the Just Transition agenda.
Youngo and the IP organizations raised up some interventions that were hopeful, acknowledging the importance of indigenous leadership and acknowledging the importance of moving away from the commodification of our Mother Earth.
How do you think can the dialogues under the Just Transition Work Program influence or shape the further negotiations on just transition?
Well, I mean, that's a tricky question because, I mean, it is a very cross-cutting issue. It's touching on the mitigation, the adaptation, and the most important, the means of implementation. Because when we are talking about the transition, there is a lot of means of implementation that is required, specifically when it comes to the finance, when it comes to the capacity building, when it comes to the technology transfer. The main essence of the just transition is to be inclusive and to leave no one behind. So if we don't engage well with the civil society and with everybody within the process, we will not be able to reach substantive outcomes.
The fear is that we have an endless series of dialogues without any actual decision on just transition. And what we sorely need, what we urgently need, is a just transition work program that works, that actually leads to outputs and implementation. The problem is that if it's left solely to countries to implement their own policies without the international cooperation element, without the support for those countries who are unable to pay for a transition on their own, then just transitions aren't going to go any further. As with lots of the negotiations here, the challenges are challenges about power. It's about who holds power, who has the resources to transition, and it's about whether or not we actually see justice as part of this process.
We think that these were good kickoff sessions, so to say, for the ongoing negotiations, because in these more informal types of dialogues, countries can actually engage better with each other than in the formal UN negotiation style. So now we know what countries' perspectives are, where they start from, and here we can then just set off on the negotiations and see clear lines where there are synergies, where there are conflict lines, and then we can go from there.
Probably one of the lowest hanging fruits that can come out of this dialogue is providing more guidance, which a conversation will happen tomorrow by the Response Measures Unit on how you go about conducting social dialogues and engagement. And another thing is around metrics. For there to be accountability and transparency, we need to measure the level and extent of implementation, both qualitatively and quantitatively.
During dialogues, a lot of topics and challenges were raised by parties, and that gave us an approach of the challenges and the gaps that all parties are facing. The challenge now is how to focus our discussion on the negotiations on some of those topics to give the Just Transition Work Program a crucial role on the elaboration of new NDCs, NAPs, and LTLETs.
We're at a real turning point in the negotiations around our work program, in sort of determining the path it will take and the scope that it will hold. And civil society, including the women and gender constituency, is really committed to continuing to push and continuing to fight for it to have that broad scope of social and economic justice. And so we are really anticipating and planning and hoping for subsequent dialogues to cover topics like international cooperation, resource mobilization, care economy, some of these huge transformative topic areas that will really allow us to get into the deeper questions that we believe a just transition needs to cover. And so that's where we anticipate this work program going, but we really need parties to step up.
The main challenge will be passed from the dialogue into the negotiations and discussing concrete steps. I think that countries will need to take into account not only just transition in a national perspective, but this geopolitical dimension.
From the trade union movement, we want clear chapters on just transition in every NDC, and this just transition work program can contribute to better understanding of the concept when they start preparing the national climate plans. I found it very positive that in the discussions here there was, as I indicated before, a strong reference to the trade unions and the attention for workers. And now it's nice to say these things when you're in Bonn. The challenge is that the negotiators, the ministers, don't forget this when they arrive back in their capitals and when they start working on their NDCs.
Getting just transitions into more NDCs, it would be a good first step coming out from this dialogue. But as it was shown, it's more than just putting it there. It needs to be implemented. So I think the challenges are those sticking topics and not falling back to entrenched positions.
It's very vital at this moment that we're in, since we're at the beginning stages of this dialogue, that we uplift and allow Indigenous people to be a primary holder of this conversation, understanding that they have a long history of the importance of a reciprocal relationship with our Mother Earth, and that their Indigenous knowledge-based structure, older than any university system that we have, making it the oldest science available, needs to be inserted at this time. The challenges are our policies and the direction of the UNFCCC is still being dictated by the fossil fuel industry. If a just transition does not have a pathway to transition off of fossil fuel, there will be no just transition.
Hi again, I'm now down here at the River Rhine, which is right next to the conference venue. As you can see, Germany is currently suffering from high waters and devastating floods, feeling the consequences of the climate crisis as many other countries have, are and will be. Ensuring a just transition is crucial for upholding public support for ambitious climate action. We hope the many perspectives we have shown from people here in Bonn will give you a better picture of where we are at with the discussions on just transition at the United Nations and which progress we can expect at COP29 in Baku and beyond.